Good morning, everyone. On behalf of everyone at the Crest Network, I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar entitled March Madness, How to Adjust If Your Year is Not Starting Off Great. My name is Bill Giannone, and we're joined today by Dick Wagner, who will be silently following along with today's presentation. I want to thank you all for your continued support of the Crest Network, and I want to start today by addressing one of the things that I think is a big worry for a lot of companies, and that is what happens when I make great plans for the year ahead and I get off to a rough start. It always feels like I'm playing catch up. So that's what we're going to discuss today. We all know the term March Madness, even if we're not a big sports fan. It's kind of become ingrained into our culture that this is the time of year when the college basketball playoffs happen, and it creates a lot of spark and a lot of excitement throughout the entire world, not just the sports world, but the marketing world as well. It's a great few weeks of TV, and it provides marketing opportunities for companies to get their word out to a lot of different genres because you have teens and 20 somethings watching these games, and you also have senior citizens. So it's a really good concept. March Madness in our industry really relates to something completely different. It's not a time of excitement, it's a time of nerve wracking because what happens is we turn the calendar and we get into March and we start looking at how the year's going. And for most of us, we might not be too aware, but if we start looking at what's going on, we realize that we've got a major issue if our first 2 months did not live up to expectations. Now, normally that would be cause for concern because the revenue would be down, and obviously we need revenue, we need income off of that revenue generation to be able to run our companies. So we always start to fret and we start to sit there and say, all right, what's going wrong? And the tendency is to overreact. So we're looking at March and we're saying, all right, the first 2 months didn't work out as planned. Now what do we have to do? What now is always the question. So before we get there, let's do one thing. Let's stay calm, let's take a breath, and let's worry about first things first. Don't panic. The first tendency is obviously to start wanting to overreact and to correct things right off the bat. Think about, you're on the road and you're driving and you're kind of not paying attention, and all of a sudden you find yourself wandering out of your lane. The single worst thing you can do is to jerk the car back, thinking that's going to put you back in the middle. Many times that overreaction results in you getting out of control in the other direction and causing a real dilemma for yourself. So I'm telling you, don't panic. You're only 1/6 of the way through the year, 16% of the way through. You've got everything in front of you, and you've got enough time not only to correct any problems, but you've also got enough time to find solutions. The worst thing would be to try to take the 2 months and make a snap decision on what's wrong and make a snap decision on how to correct it. We're going to discuss all the different ways that you should be looking at finding the problems and creating solutions. I want to make sure everybody understands that this is not a problem that came about in a day, so it's not something you're going to solve in a day. As with everything else, I want to make sure you're working the plan. You have to stress and you have to put ultimate importance on faith in your plan. That doesn't mean that the plan can never be tweaked, but you spent a lot of time, hopefully, and if you're a Crest member, hopefully you spent a lot of time with Dick and myself developing a plan for your company that involves steady growth and involves processes. If you're not enjoying steady growth, but you're sticking to your processes, it should just be a matter of time and some small tweaks. But if you're not following the processes and you're not working your plan, that's when you're putting your company at risk of this slight change being more than just an aberration. So let's make sure we always work the plan. First step is we're going to review our numbers. We're going to take a look at the production numbers for the first 2 years, and we're going to compare it to last year. We want to make sure we have a good reference point. Let's just say last year, we were a company that did about $50,000 a month in revenue, And then this year, we decided we wanted to up it and we wanted to be 75,000 a month in revenue. Well, if we look at the first 2 months and we say we're only at 55,000 a month and we're panicking because we're not making our goal of 75,000, let's put it in perspective. If we did 50 last year and we're doing 55 this year, we're still improving over last year, which should always be our goal. Yes, if we're not at 75, we need to address why we're not there. But we also might need to take a look at some things that explain why we're not at 75 and say to ourselves, maybe, just maybe, we planned on something that was a little too aggressive or a little too, let's call it anxiety creating. And we were always going to fail because it was going to be very difficult to meet those goals. So let's be realistic about our analysis. So let's look at those numbers and compare it to last year's numbers. First thing we want to ask ourselves is, what is the difference in the 2 years? Is it higher or lower than last year? And not just compare it to what our estimate or budget for this year was. Let's make sure we're looking at that. The second thing we want to make sure we look at is, what went wrong? Can we look at it and can we say it was a marketing issue? Maybe we had one of our marketers was out sick or out on maternity leave, and we know that that is probably a cause for some of our connections and our contacts to maybe not be as aggressive in their lead generation as they were. Maybe our sales, maybe one of our salesmen or our project managers or first responders has had a difficult time at home, and maybe that's now translated and reflected itself into our closing ratios. Is it production? Maybe something's happening with our crews. Maybe we lost a key person who was one of our better crew leaders, and now we're finding that our projects, maybe we're doing as much work as we want to do, but maybe the actual project size is a little smaller because maybe our guys aren't doing the calculation properly for things like equipment, or they're not determining that it's a Cat 3 loss and they're writing everything up as Cat 1. Those are all things that could be affecting our revenue, and we need to be able to do that. Hand in hand with that is we need to be able to say to ourselves, is the problem easily identifiable? If it's not easily identifiable, we're going to be in for a little bit of analysis and we're going to be in for a longer time. If it's something that's easily identifiable, if something I just described where somebody was out of work sick for 3 weeks or somebody had COVID, those are things easily identifiable where you can pretty much say, all right, let's give it another month with that person back and let's see if that makes the difference. If we've lost an important crew member, we need to say, have we properly trained our existing or new crew members to pick up that slack? Those would be easily identifiable things. So, sorry for the tongue twister there. We're going to talk about the things that might not be so easily identifiable, and I'm going to give you guys a little bit of a roadmap to go through for each one of our categories, the marketing, the sales, and the production. So let's start with the marketing side of it. Let's ask these questions. Are you generating the leads you had hoped to get? Remember, it all starts with lead generation. As much as I like to tease Dick Wagner, the most important part of your company's success and long-term success and growth is we need to have a very active process within the company for lead generation. That's the specialty of what Dick does. That's how he drives the company's revenue. I can help all I want on the back end with helping with invoicing and helping with purchasing of materials and helping with good pay schedules and commission schedules and anything that we can do in the office once the money gets generated. But if that phone doesn't ring, I really can't do a lot to help. So we've got to get that phone to ring. So the first thing we always want to ask, are our leads where we want them to be? If they're not, we have to figure out how and why, and especially where we're falling short. We have to be able to make that analysis. We can't just say, well, we're getting five fewer leads than last year. How do we make sure that we know where the 5 fewer leads are coming from? We've done this at a couple of the companies this year already. We've done some early year analysis. And one of our Crest clients realized that they were getting half of the internet leads that they were generating a year ago. So I then went back and we looked at what was the schedule a year ago. And it turns out the company was spending about $4,000 a month on internet lead generation, SEO type investment. We've eliminated that over the last 9 months because we started focusing in other areas of the business. So because we're doing 5 fewer leads in the internet, that's not the reason anymore because we've already accounted for that. So we did a deeper dive and we actually found out that we had lost a plumbing company who was generating a lot of business for us, a lot of leads. We did not know we lost them because for whatever reason, the marketer had not visited them in the last 60 days. So just like we always say, when you lose touch on your active A leads, those guys who are really active with you, every once in a while, the result is that they kind of walk away and they're not there for you all the time when you expect them to be. So you can never take those people for granted. That's been addressed, and we're going to really study their activity over the next 60 days to make sure that that hole gets filled. But that's what I'm talking about. We need to know where you're falling short. If you're falling short of projections for this year, you have to take an analysis and make sure, like I said before, that those projections were realistic to begin with. A lot of times we'll say to ourselves, oh, it's no big deal. I know I could do 50% more business. Our guys are dogging it. I know all we have to do is work hard. Well, any business to grow 50% is going to take a lot of different things to happen and a lot of different factors. It's not enough to just say, oh, well, we're not putting forth a full effort. And once we put the full effort in, we're going to grow 50%. You very well may grow 50%, but it might take you 9 months or 12 months or 18 months to grow that 50%, even working at full capacity. Dick and myself, one of the hardest things that we find working with our Crest members on a weekly basis is managing expectations when things aren't going super duper 100%. And this is part of what we're doing here. Let's make sure our expectations and projections from the beginning of the year were realistic. And then finally, let's make sure we're gathering enough data from our marketers so that we can assess their true efforts. Again, we were able to discern the fact that our marketer had not visited that lead source plumber for 60 days because we went back and looked at his past 60 days workload, and we were able to see that that name of that lead source never came up on his activity logs. So make sure your marketers are putting in the work by making sure that you're able to document and verify their level of work. How do we do that? Obviously, the first place is a really good CRM, a really good client manager, because every time your marketer visits that client, they should be putting input and data into the CRM in that client's name, activity log, or whatever, any kind of contact info. This way, we can always check. A good CRM gives the owner or the manager the ability to always know at basically a 5-minute notice how hard your marketers have been working. If you've set reasonable expectations for them on what you think their timelines and their week should look like, they should be able to meet those, and you should be able to check that in your CRM. If you're not using a CRM, there are other ways that you can check on them, but it's going to be much more difficult because it's going to require a lot more trust and faith. They're going to be filling out a lot of hand forms. You may be doing ride-alongs with them. You may be having weekly or biweekly meetings with them. But again, there's a lot of trust involved. The CRM is what I call the trust but verify method. You're still hoping and trusting that they're going to put in the work, but you're also have an ability to verify. And that's kind of a good balance. It holds everybody accountable. I like it because marketers should embrace the use of a CRM because it's a central hub for all of their information for them to be able to be analyzed. Most people who are doing a good job want to be analyzed because the analysis proves how good of a job they're doing. So if you have somebody who you suspect is dogging it and maybe is just milking it, there's a really good chance they're not going to want to participate in the use of a CRM. Conversely, if you have somebody who's a real go-getter and aggressive and really wants to not only prove themselves, but wants to have the information available for you to be able to see it so that they can actually get raises and get higher commissions and earn more money, they're going to embrace a CRM. So to me, in the right model and in the right practices and processes of your business, a CRM really is a no-brainer. So let's really think about, if you're not using one, let's make sure we're using it to the best of our ability. Moving from marketing to sales, if we've addressed everything on marketing and we can't really figure out that there's anything really weak on the marketing side, the next place to go to is on the sales side, closing out those jobs. So let's check out these certain points that we can worry about. Let's check out our closing ratio for the year. If we're not calculating closing ratio, we're never going to be able to analyze issues within our company. Every single one of us should be able to say how many leads we got, how many of those leads turned into jobs, and what that percentage is. And again, if we're not closing close to 70% or in excess of 70%, we're leaving a lot of money on the table. That's opportunity lost, and we need to make sure we're up around that number. So let's first look at what our closing ratio for the year is. If we can't figure out our closing ratio, the rest of this doesn't make sense. But once we know what our closing ratio is, how far away from our target are we? Once again, we have that same analysis that we did on the marketing side. If we're far off from our target, we have two questions to ask. Is our target a realistic target? If it is a realistic target, then the second question is, then why are we missing the target? Do we have that easy answer? Well, our guy was out sick for a month and we had somebody who isn't trained at closing doing the closing for us. If that's the case, we've got our answer. But if it's not the case and we've actually got our same people doing the same processes and all of a sudden we went from a 75 closing percentage to a 35 or 40 or 60% closing percentage, we need to look at that. We need to look at each individual lead and we need to go back and forth. We need to make sure that our salesmen are following the process. If you don't have a written down, practiced, and executed sales process for getting work authorization signed, you need to talk with me because we have to have that. You can't just send guys out there and say, oh, come on, anybody could sell this. The woman called up and said her water heater broke. There's water in the basement. Anybody could sell that. Well, guess what, guys? That's not true. Not everybody can sell that. And certainly not everybody could sell that to the extent that we should be selling that so that we can not only make sure we're doing 100% right by the client, but also making sure that we're billing for 100% of our work. Those are two things, and they don't have to be separate and apart. You're not a crook if you want to maximize the dollars that we can make on every single work authorization we get signed. You're only a crook if you want to do that at the expense of doing 100% of the work that the client's entitled to. So we have to make sure that we understand that our sales process is not just to get a 90% closing ratio and every job is $2,000. That doesn't benefit the company. We have to make sure that we're signing as many jobs as we can, making sure that we're not compromising the integrity of our work or our ability to invoice fully for the work we do. So make sure they're following the process. How do we do that? Once again, our software, our company software, the CRM software or the project management software that you guys are using, there should be many, many steps that the salesmen have to undertake when they go out to a job. And more importantly than the ones they sign up, they have to have clear explanations for why they didn't sign a job up. So you start there first. If you've got a 60% closing ratio, the first place you go is you go to those 40% of leads that were generated that resulted in not signing them up. You have to go through there. Start looking for trends. Start looking for language that your salesmen and your closers are using. If the first responders are always saying, well, I gave them a quote and our price was too high, maybe we need to address the process that those salesmen are following, because if the price is too high, either they're writing much too high of an estimate to give to the client, or maybe they're not selling the value of what they're providing properly. You know, going into a house and saying, this is no big deal, guys. We see this all the time. We'll take care of this, no problem, creates an atmosphere to the homeowner that it isn't a big deal. So now, what is a big deal bill to the client after you've said all of that? In my mind, if you're going to charge me anything that has a comma in it, that's a big deal. When you say no big deal, we see this all the time, we'll take care of it, that's a $500 thing. Because if somebody came into my house and the plumber came to look at a leak and the plumber says, oh, this is no big deal, I'll take care of it right away, I don't expect him to give me a big bill. So now if we do the work and it's no big deal and we turn around and give them a $4,000 or $5,000 invoice, which should be where we should be on a normal water restoration job, they're going to freak out. And if they freak out, how do you think they're going to help when the adjuster gets involved? And the adjuster starts saying, well, this looks a little high. The homeowner can say, yeah, you're right. So let's make sure we're training a process for our salesmen and our first responders that manages expectations in a way that changes that language from no big deal, we do this all the time, to we're experts at handling things like this. And I'm glad you called us, because this isn't something that should be taken lightly, and it's not something that a non-professional should do. See, I just worded it that they can trust us because we do it all the time, but it is a big deal. I didn't blow smoke up their butts. It is, guys. We take for granted that what we do is something that very few people are capable of doing because they're not professionally trained to do it properly. That's a big miss for a lot of our companies, where they're not training their first responders to set that expectation level. So if people think that this is something very few people could do, it's very serious, they shouldn't do it themselves, they're expecting a bill with a comma in it. So we should be setting that level of expectation. Finally, if we've gotten through all of that, what can we be doing better? Maybe it might require us to walk out there and go along on a ride along with our salesman and observe the process. Don't ever get involved in the process. Observe it, be there, kind of like as a shadow. Let them do 100% of the work. Otherwise, you're influencing what happens. And now what you've done is you've created a job for yourself. You have to be there on every sales call. So let's not do anything other than kind of mirror them, be a shadow, see what they're doing, and maybe you can discern some of this language or details within the process that can help out. Maybe we have to have a better communication between our lead source and our closers. Maybe the marketers aren't saying the right things to the lead sources, and these are legitimately jobs that should have never been leads to begin with. So we need to explore all of those things, but we need to do that, and it's not something that's going to get fixed in a day or two. Let's understand that we have to do this analysis to make sure that we're fixing it right. Through the first two steps, you'll notice that I talked a lot about process. It's very important in the sales process, in the marketing process, that they are followed, because we can find issues a lot of times by checking the process itself. Well, guess what, guys? Same thing happens in production. We have to find out if our crews are working at their peak. How do we do that? Once again, let's go back to our construction and our mitigation process, and let's make sure we've got a production management software that we're using. We have to be able to track how long our guys are out on a job. If we write up an Xactimate invoice for a job that says the total amount of time that crew should have spent on this job is 16 hours, not counting our monitoring. Let's just say the demo, the cleaning, and the setting of equipment should have taken 16 hours. Well, for a two-man crew, that means that job should have been done in one day. If you go back and look at some of your jobs during the course of the year, and you see that in the first couple months, you had instances where guys were on a job 2 days, 2.5 days, and they should have only been there for a day, guess what? They're not working at their peak. They may have gotten a little lazy at the end of the year and not snapped back. And now they're still taking that lazy attitude, because a lot of times many of us are a little quiet at the end of the year, and they develop some bad habits, and those bad habits carry over to the beginning of the year. Well, guess what? If that happens, it might not affect your top line. It might not be affecting the revenue line, but it's definitely affecting the profit line, because you're spending more to get that work done than you really should be. We also have to make sure, as a corollary to how hard they're working, we have to make sure that they're working thoroughly and completely. Many times at the beginning of a year, because it's slow at the end of a year, both our salesmen, but also our lead techs, are not going back to the good habits of making sure that we're really thoroughly scoping out that loss so that every single thing that has to be done on that job is being done. Or they're getting a little lazy and not putting enough equipment on a job. Silly little things like at the beginning of a year, maybe last year you guys did this, at the beginning of a year, for those of you in the northern states, when you're doing your drying, a lot of times you have to add temp heat to a job to get that temperature up high enough so your dehumidifiers, the LGRs, can actually work. You know, if the temperature in the home doesn't get up to a certain temperature, those LGRs are not pulling the moisture out of the air. So we have to add some temp heat, especially crawl spaces, basements, areas where they might not be fully climate controlled. We have to make sure we're doing that. Our guys might have forgotten that stupid little step, but guess what? That stupid little step could add $300, $400, $500 to every invoice, and that could be the difference between last year's numbers and this year's numbers. So let's make sure of silly little things like that. Thorough, complete work. Maybe they're just leaving some equipment off because they forgot that the calculations changed from 4 years ago. I know that sounds crazy, but believe it or not, I run into this all the time where our technicians are not putting enough equipment on because they forgot that the calculation changed. So let's make sure that they're doing that, because that's an area where our invoices suffer if the production suffers. We have to make sure that they're placing the right amount of equipment. We just talked about this, but this is the number one pet peeve I have. There are certain things that are written in the S500 that allow us to maximize equipment, and many, many times our guys minimize equipment. They think what's best for the homeowner, or they think what's easiest for them, and they don't think how they have to maximize the invoice. I'm not telling you that they have to be thinking only about money and that their sole job is to just take everything on the truck and put it on the job. I'm not saying that at all. But I am saying that in the language for the S500, when it says to do a calculation for air movers for a 200 square foot room, some guys put 3 air movers on a 200 square foot room, and the rule says that we can put up to 5 on there. So in just a 200 square foot room, which is a 15 by 15 room, the difference in air movers could add up to as much as $200 to $300 for that invoice per room. That's a big difference. I've been on losses where we've had 6 rooms of that size where air movers were on, and the company put 18 air movers on, and they could have put 30 on. Now we're talking about $400 to $500 per day. That's a big difference, guys. We have to stress that. It never hurts to stress that at your weekly meetings at least once a month. It never hurts. Make sure they're doing everything in their power to maximize that equipment. And finally, we need to be looking at the people creating the invoices. In some companies, the lead techs and the PMs are the ones creating the invoices. In other companies, the invoices are created back in the office from data that's generated out in the field. So let's make sure that when that's happening, that process of getting the information to the person creating the invoice, that process is taking place in a really good fashion. Let's check that process, look for holes. Let's make sure that we're using the proper price list if we're continuing to use the Xactimate price lists. If we're not, let's make sure our current pricing is reflecting our cost of doing business. If you created a custom price list 2 years ago, there's a real good chance that your labor costs today are a lot higher than they were 2 years ago, just based on the fact of the shrinking labor pool, especially for technicians. We're paying our technicians in just about every case. Every Crest client I've worked with are paying their technicians a sizable amount more than they were 2 years ago. So understanding that, if you haven't updated your price list, maybe you need to address that as well. So let's make sure we do the same things in production that we were doing in marketing and in sales. Okay. Now we also have to take our chances and say to ourselves, we've done enough looking back. We also have to look forward, and we have to say, what are the things we can do looking forward? So ask ourselves, what can I do this month to start in a new direction? What are some changes I can do? What are some easy changes? Are there some things you've been holding off on saying, you know what, during the winter, I don't like to go out and I don't like to do a lot of plumber events because the plumbers don't really hang around the supply houses. So I usually don't do them until April or May. Well, maybe we can push that up and do one in March because whether or not they hang around, they still go to those supply houses every day. So if you were scheduling your first plumber event in May or June, maybe schedule one for March or April. Let's get that going a little earlier. Start pushing. You have to say to yourself, where do I want to be in 3 months? You don't want to say to yourself, one of the things I'm really concerned about is I want to get it fixed because I need for my first quarter to be exactly where I wanted it to be. We're not going to be able to implement a lot of changes, even if we spend the next couple of days and we identify what the problem is. We probably can't do enough to get those changes to take place to have such an impact just in March, where it's going to carry us through and recoup all of the losses from January and February. So we have to say to ourselves today, where do I want to be in 3 months from now based on where I am now? That's very realistic. That's the way that we can control where we can move forward. Because looking back is always great for analysis, but the woe is me attitude that a lot of guys end up finding themselves in usually is, oh man, I had a terrible January and February. There's nothing I can do about it. So I'm just going to have a terrible year. Since we're doing this as a webinar, I can't ask for a show of hands, but I would venture to say if I asked for a show of hands, most of you would put your hands up and say, at one point in the last couple of years, you've gotten into that funk. You've gotten into what I call the death spiral of management, where you've said that to yourself and you've said, there's nothing I can do. I'm screwed for this year because of what happened in January and February. That's a terrible attitude to take, because the one thing that we could say to ourselves, we control what happens today and we control what happens tomorrow. We have no control over what's already happened. The best we can do about what has already happened is we can use it as a learning tool. That's what Dick and I are really, really strong proponents of. We love having data and we love having analysis so that we can use that data and analysis to tell us where we're coming from, but to be able to set the course going forward. If you don't realize where you've come from, you can't really move forward unless you're willing to scrap everything and start over. Now, for most of us, that's not realistic. As a matter of fact, Dick and I have had many opportunities to work with startup companies over the last couple of years. And as one of our priorities and one of our practices within the Crest Network, our own company processes don't allow us to work with startups. One of the things we pride ourselves on, and one of our strengths in the Crest Network, is we want to make sure that we are working with you in an existing company, using your core company, and then modeling that for success going forward. It's a totally different mindset and model for brand new companies, and it's not really our coaching style. It's kind of like taking a baseball coach and saying, well, cricket looks like baseball, so you should be able to coach cricket. No, the rules are all different. The style of the game is all different. So what we do is we coach companies that are existing already. But part of what we really find exciting is being able to take that past, draw a line in the sand, and implement exactly what we've got written here, that we control, we collectively, but you as the owner control what's going to happen to your company today and tomorrow, because you have the ability to take action. That's the important thing. Stop looking backward. When we look backward, we have no ability to change that if we say to ourselves, we can't take action. So all the things we discussed, the ability to look at what's happened in marketing, the ability to look at what's happened in our sales, and look at what's happened in our production and invoicing, those are all done with the knowledge that we're going to take action. We're going to move forward. How do we move forward? There's only one way to move forward. You have to buy in and believe in your own mind that it's not too late. I said in one of the first slides in this presentation that we're only 16% of the way through the year. Now, I know that sounds crazy. That's still a lot of work and it's still a lot of time. But there's a really good chance that it's not like you guys had nothing happen in the first 2 months. You just probably didn't meet expectations. So in order to get back to where you wanted to be for the whole year, all you need to do to make up that 16% is pick up a couple of percentage points each month. I don't want to play around with math, but if you just work 1 or 2% harder for the rest of the year, correcting the things that happen in the first 2 months, you'll make it up and you'll be exactly where you want to be at the end of the year. That's the big misnomer. Playing catch up isn't always a bad thing. For those of you who are into things like horse racing or auto racing, the guy in the lead, yes, he's in a really good position, and I'd always rather be first than last. But the guy who's last in an auto race on the fifth lap of a 300 lap race is certainly not out of it. Does he have more work to do than the guy in the lead? Yeah, but it's not something that can't be overcome. Does he have to catch it all up in the next 5 laps? Absolutely not. He can come from behind and he could actually blow away expectations depending on how well the rest of the months go. For me, it's more of a mindset. You have to not get bogged down in, oh man, we're in bad shape. We're in trouble. The concept of we're in trouble as an athlete usually is when the first door to conceding defeat gets opened. I talk about coaching. I know that Dick has spent a good portion of his life coaching, even if it wasn't in the restoration industry. He's a coach, he's a mentor, he's a leader. And in all walks of his life, he does that. He spends a heck of a lot of his time volunteering, helping out in the state of Florida with children who come from broken homes and foster programs. And he's an advocate for the children. He's a leader, but he's also coaching and helping out the parents, not only who are taking in the foster children, but he's also helping out the parents who are struggling to keep their families together. So he's using it in all walks of life. I spent a lot of time, over 30 years, coaching youth sports. So I really have a passion on the coaching side for mentoring, training. But most of the training that I did on the youth sports side was not about X's and O's or about the physical skills. I spent more of my time doing the mental training. So I really feel like I have a passion for that, and I want to do it here in our industry as well. So as an owner, the one thing I want you to eliminate is that feeling of we're in trouble or I think it's too late. Because we're not in any kind of timed event here as an owner of a business. We do use our year or our calendar year as benchmarks, blocks of time. But if you're an owner, you have an ultimate goal of getting to a certain point in your business or removing yourself from day-to-day operations. Those are things that do not have a deadline. As long as you get there, that's all that matters. I compare it to being a marathon runner. Yes, those first few guys that cross the finish line are the professionals in the New York City Marathon, and they're running for prize money and popularity and ribbons. But there are tens of thousands of people who enter the New York City Marathon whose only goal is to finish. And it doesn't matter if they finish in 5 hours or 7 hours or even the next day. Yes, there are people who finish the marathon the next day. As long as they finish, they've accomplished their goal. Well, that's what you guys are doing here. We don't have 6-month goals, annual goals in terms of owning a business. We might have those for certain things we want to implement or certain targets we want to achieve. But Dick and I work with companies who want to grow, who want to have the owner become more of an owner and less of a worker, and who have a long-term vision. We're all in this for the long run. So understand it's never too late. Don't open that door by saying, you know what, I think we're in trouble. The trouble is where the problems occur. We have to be solution-based. I want to go back to thinking this way. I want to go back to saying we control what happens today and tomorrow. That's more important to me than anything else. I want you to flip that cube from backward to forward. Okay, guys, it's never too late. On behalf of Dick Widener, I really want to thank you for joining us today. We're here every Tuesday, 10 a.m. And if you didn't catch us live, all of our webinars are available to you as a member of the Crest Network. If you haven't checked out the website, please go to thecrestnetwork.com. On top of the webinars, we have hundreds of different resources for you guys. We've got, obviously, as a member, you already know what your access is, but I just want to reiterate that you've got access to an entire bank and library of information on commercial restoration, be it marketing tips and tools, be it verticals, if you want to expand into different things on the commercial side. We've also got hundreds of articles and resource materials for you guys for your day-to-day residential operations. We've got resources for yourself, resources for your technicians, resources for your marketers, basically anybody in your company. We've got the ability there. We've also got the Crest Library, which is a separate website called crestlibrary.com, and that's available to all of you as well, being a Crest member. We encourage you to go on there, bounce around, find something that piques your interest. Use our website as training tools for your weekly meetings with your teams as well. The things that we're training you guys that you're implementing in your company, if they hear it from us, it could also be a good reinforcement for you. So I just want to throw that out there. Again, we thank you for all of your support. We look forward to seeing you next time. On behalf of Dick Wagner, I'm Bill Giannone. Thanks for joining us. Have a great day.